Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from the Lord of the Rings holiday box set, Gandalf of the Secret Fire. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It will really help out the channel and no extra cost to you. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck text, gifts, and more for as little as $1. You can also become a channel member for just 99 cents. Show off your support with a logo next to your name and exclusive emojis. Or you can always just support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a new video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Gandalf is a 3/4 avatar wizard for 1 generic, 1 blue, 1 red, and 1 white. He has an ability that triggers whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand outside of your turn. When you do, the spell becomes suspended with 3 time counters after resolving. This is an incredibly powerful and open-ended ability that essentially lets you delay copy your instants and sorceries so long as you're casting them outside of your turn and from your hand. Therefore, you can essentially build Gandalf with whatever instants you want and with whatever payoffs you want for casting those instants and sorceries. That being said, if you want some ideas on how I tackle this commander, look on. First off is the obvious problem of casting sorceries from our hand outside of our turn. That's easily bypassed by giving them flash. Although there are multiple ways of achieving this, the ones I included and tested are Quicken, Port Upon a Wind, Teferi Time Raveler, Leyline of Anticipation, and Vedalken Orrery. While the last two are redundant, sometimes it's good to have redundancy because you're facing against 3 sources of interaction in a typical commander game. That being said, the Leyline is free on turn 0, and it along with the Orrery give flash to all of our spells. Teferi only gives flash to our sorceries, but does so by gaining loyalty counters. He also prevents opponents from playing outside of sorcery speed, which is a huge bonus. Quicken and Born Upon a Wind are amazing because they're instants. If we cast these outside of our turn, they will be suspended with 3 time counters. We also draw a card as a bonus. However, we could then cast our next sorcery with flash thanks to Quicken, but all of our spells with Born Upon a Wind. Maybe that's why Quicken got a rarity downshift. Winding Canyons is excluded because it doesn't take up a slot in the deck and can help us make an absolute most of our open mana. If we're saving it all for casting instants and sorceries outside of our turn, we might as well cast our creatures when it's most convenient to as well. Besides suspending instants and sorceries cast from our hand outside of our turn, the deck has multiple ways of making the most of casting these types of spells. One of the 2 most important aspects is winning the game. Passionate Archaeologist and Quintorius can trigger whenever we cast spells from exile, which is what happens when those suspended spells lose their last time counter. And when they trigger, they're dealing damage to opponents. Well, the background only deals damage to 1 opponent, but it's equal to the mana value of that spell, which could be considerable. All of Quintorius' abilities are also relevant here. His positive loyalty ability protects him with a chump blocker, while his second loyalty ability triggers his triggered ability thanks to Discover 4, which is nothing to scoff at. His ultimate isn't the purpose of running him, but if you have enough fetch lands in the graveyard, you can turn them into red mana in a pinch, along with any spells you'd like to cast from there that turn. Fiery Inscription, Exalted Flamer of Tzeentch, and Gandalf the Grey also trigger off of what the deck's going to be doing anyways. Whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, we have the potential of dealing damage to all of our opponents. As a bonus, the demon can also recover an instant or sorcery at random during our upkeep. Gandalf can also tap or untap another permanent, which is great for mana rocks and lands. We can also win with spells like Call for Aid and Taunt from the Rampart. The deck is more focused on slinging spells than swinging with creatures. Being able to manipulate a board full of combatants can do so much mayhem as well as give us a significant advantage. So imagine being able to copy these spells multiple times a game. The other important aspect of casting these spells is to help us not run out of steam. Vega the Watcher, Wavebreak, Hippocamp, Osgood, Operation Double, Whirlwind of Thought, and Serum Sovereign all trigger in one way or another due to the deck's main game plan of casting instants and sorceries outside of our turn, or from having been suspended, drawing us a card in the process. Vega only triggers when the spells are cast from anywhere besides our hand, i.e. exile and the command zone. The Hippocamp triggers whenever we cast the first spell outside of our turn, so hopefully 3 times between our turns. Osgood copies itself whenever it's cast. This gives us 2 clue tokens whenever we cast spells from exile or the command zone, which is great because we can then tap them down to crack a clue and draw a card. Whirlwind of Thought is the best of these though, since it triggers whenever we cast any non-creature spell, regardless of where we cast it from. Same with Serum Sovereign, but we have to pay 1 blue each time in order to remove that oil counter. But at least we also scry 2 after drawing the card. Speaking of, Rivendell also lets us scry, improving the quality of our card draw, all without taking up a slot on the deck. However, none of these permanents will trigger Gandalf. For that, we have See the Truth, Windfall, Inspiring Refrain, Seagate Restoration, and Valakut Awakening. See the Truth is already decent when cast from our hand, but is absolutely busted when cast for free from exile from being suspended. Windfall is self-explanatory, but wheeling twice thanks to Suspend is pretty good. Inspiring Refrain already suspends itself, so it works independently of Gandalf. The last two don't take up spell slots in the deck if you aren't greedy and play them as lands if you're missing your land drops. Reliquary Tower and Thought Vessel are included because of how many ways the deck is drawing cards both directly and indirectly. Thought Vessel also doubles as a mana rock, which is most welcome in a non-green deck like this one, with Soul Ring and Arcane Signet being the only other mana rocks in the deck, since the best kind of mana acceleration is land-based mana acceleration. Other ways we can make the most of casting these types of spells is by multiplying set effects. We're already quote-unquote copying these spells via suspending them after resolution, so we can dive deeper into that flavor. Veyran Voice of Duality and Volcanwrath are two such cards. Veyran will double any trigger that occurred from having cast an instant or sorcery. This won't suspend a spell twice, so don't worry about its interaction with Gandalf. So we can damage opponents twice, draw twice as many cards, etc. Will can copy our instants and sorceries per se, but only when we obtain his emblem. It's not that difficult to achieve since Will's first ability nerfs the two biggest creatures on the board. This makes them then easier to manage as well as eliminate. Recovering our spells in another way, albeit roundabout. Mystic Sanctuary and Elixir of Immortality are included just for that. The Sanctuary doesn't take up a slot in the deck and can be fetched for with half of the deck's fetch lands. Doing this in response to recovering a response or interaction from your graveyard is a pro-gamer move, especially if you're able to draw it afterwards. The Elixir helps shuffle those instants and sorceries back into the library, along with the bonus of gaining 5 life and being the main of build decks. As for making the most of Gandalf, Suspend 3 is kind of slow. Sure, it's amazing to get your spells back for free, but it requires setup and the payoff is, well, still a bit slow. So how about we time travel? Rift Elemental, Time Beetle, and the 10th Doctor let us remove time counters from our suspended spells at will. The Elemental can only do it per suspended spell, but being so cheap to cast and activate, at instant speed no less, is well worth it. The only downside to the Beetle is needing to connect in combat. The Doctor has a hefty cost as 7 generic mana, but you'll time travel thrice, which is essentially the maximum amount of time counters anyways. Wibbly Wobbly, Timey Wimey, and Dust of Moments also help us remove time counters while being spells that trigger Gandalf. Depending on how you order the stack, you could resolve these and then have other suspended spells then be cast afterwards for having their time counters removed on resolution. Paradox Haze and Sphinx of the Second Sun also help remove time counters by giving us extra upkeeps. Since we remove a time counter from each suspended spell at the beginning of each of our upkeeps, these provide insane value by getting us there faster. Keep in mind that the Sphinx does not remove your post-combat main phase. You have combat, second main phase, beginning phase, and then end phase and cleanup. Joy of the Gitu and Ohor Paktik Deepest Ekpak are included as redundancy for Gandalf. While the deck has plenty of ways to protect our key creatures and board state, things happen. Jorah has us suspend any spell at any time for just 2 generic mana. With the time travel effects, this can be quite dangerous. Ohad Paktik does it without any investment in mana and regardless of timing. So long as it's an instant we're casting from our hand, it'll trigger it. It's also difficult to get rid of since it returns as a land when it dies. A land that we can then transform back into Ohad Paktik. And since land destruction is so heavily frowned upon in the format, you can take all the advantages out of it. Speaking of protection, there are a lot of creatures here we want to protect, even if there is redundancy for most of them. To that end, the deck is running Giant's Amulet, Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, Champion's Helm, and Mithril Coat. These are ubiquitous for a reason, but don't sleep on Giant's Amulet. We don't attack with our commander or utility creatures. So long as the equipped creature isn't tapped, it's relatively safe. Galadriel's Dismissal, Boros Charm, Teferi's Protection, and Clever Concealment help protect our board and, when cast outside of our turn from our hand while we control Gandalf, we'll be suspended with 3 time counters. Keep in mind that this will not happen with Teferi's Protection, since it won't go to the graveyard upon resolving, so it won't enjoy Gandalf's replacement effect from his triggered ability. Chronomatic Escape is another protective effect that's even better if you're able to cast in an opponent's turn, and the best part of it is that it self-suspends, not requiring Gandalf to do so. So good luck with swinging into us if we're able to cast this each turn via time traveling. Boseiju, who shelters all, protects our instants and sorceries from other instants and countering effects. Last thing we need is a well-timed counterspell being used against us. Since this land doesn't conventionally tap for mana, I do not consider it as a land slot in the deck, and neither should you. Speaking of lands, Riptide Laboratory does take up a land slot and is an amazing way to protect Gandalf from interaction. You'd be surprised how many people overlook this land on your battlefield when attempting to get rid of Gandalf. It's glorious. Speaking of interaction, copying our own interaction is so satisfying. Chaos Warp, Generous Gift, Stroke of Midnight, and Reality Strobe can get rid of practically anything. The best thing about Reality Strobe is it's suspending itself upon resolving, independently from Gandalf, helping trigger a lot of the deck's effects along with temporarily getting rid of problems. Guthrie Wright's History and Olorian's Searing Light are also amazing to copy because they can hit multiple problems. You don't choose with the latter one, but hitting the biggest creatures is never not good. Or we can just wipe the board with Vandal Blast, Cyclonic Rift, Time Wipe, and Blasphemous Act. Unfortunately, you can't overload anything being suspended, but you can still hit one thing at least. Suspending the last two essentially makes opponents not play creatures for 3 turns, since they'll just die again when they're recast from exile. Reprieve and Press the Enemy are the only counterspell type effects in the deck, because canning counterspells from exile at the beginning of your upkeep doesn't make much sense. Since these have the potential of bouncing spells from the stack, they're more useful, especially Press the Enemy since it can also bounce permanent. So if you use Suspended Reprieve, you can use it to bounce your own spell that also left exile if you want to be able to cast it again for future value. The big brain plays for Reprieve here are innumerable. As for how we can afford these spells and effects, Tithe, Wayfarer's Bauble, Burnished Heart, Scampering Surveyor, and Solemn Simulacrum help us out with land-based ramp. Tithe in particular is amazing here since it's on an instant, synergizing with almost everything in the deck. Same with Rousing Refrain. The last spell in the deck that self-suspends, this can help power our most expensive spells as well as paying for the 10th Doctor's activated ability. Kikar Wind's Fury is another all-star in the deck. Not only do we get chump blockers that fly each time we cast a non-creature spell, regardless from where or when, but we can sacrifice those spirits for mana if needed to. This card is so amazing here, definitely don't sleep on it. Apart from those already shown and mentioned, the rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. It's running all 3 Shock lands, all 3 Snow Duels, all 3 Slow Duels, Robber Triumph, Command Tower, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 2 of each basic land for all of the basic land ramp effects. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you, you do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Gandalf of the Secret Fire. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, there are so many ways to build Gandalf that I feel like there's no perfect way to do so. You can run literally whatever instants, sorceries, and payoffs you wanted to. You can make it more focused on dealing damage, more focused on creating tokens, more focused on copying spells, etc. Gandalf is a blank canvas with but a modicum of direction. I love these types of commanders. If you're interested in the decklist of the spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the Brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. I also want to thank any channel members. Your membership is greatly appreciated. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the man at Kirby, and happy brewing.